Okay, picture this. A company so close to total collapse that its biggest rival's CEO said he'd just shut it down and give the money back. That company was Apple. This is the incredible story of how it went from being weeks away from bankruptcy to becoming the icon we know today. Let's dive in.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? Back in 1997, Apple was just hemorrhaging money, losing its grip on the market, and honestly, it had become a bit of a punchline in the tech world. So how on earth did it pull off this epic transformation? Well, the answer is a wild story involving a crisis, a dramatic return, and a brand new, radical vision.
So let's set the stage. Just how bad was it for Apple? We have to go back to the mid-90s. And believe me, it was a mess. You really can't overstate just how far the company had fallen.
By the mid-90s, Apple's whole strategy was just chaos. The company that was once known for simple, beautiful products was now selling dozens and dozens of different computers. You had the Quadra, the Centris, the Performa, and a lot of them were basically the same machine, just sold in different places. It was completely confusing for customers. The company had totally lost its way.
Now, you gotta give them credit, they were experimenting with a ton of stuff, but almost none of it was working out. They tried digital cameras, video game consoles, even the Newton tablet, which, was way ahead of its time, but a total commercial flop. And all the while, their main Mac business was getting absolutely crushed by the cheaper Wintel combo of Microsoft Windows and Intel PCs. And it wasn't just an internal problem. The whole industry thought Apple was done for. When Michael Dell, the CEO of their biggest competitor, was asked what he'd do with Apple in 1997, he gave this absolutely brutal answer. At that point, reports were saying Apple was literally just weeks away from going completely bankrupt. But right when it seemed like the credits were about to roll on Apple, a lifeline appeared. And it came from the most unlikely place you could imagine, its own past. This right here is the turning point of the entire story.
Okay, so Apple was desperate. They needed a modern operating system to replace the old creaky macOS. So they made this final Hail Mary pass. In late 1996, for $400 million, they bought a company called Next. And who founded Next? The very same guy Apple had kicked out a decade earlier, Steve Jobs. This deal brought him back into the building, at first just as an advisor.
But Steve Jobs wasn't the kind of guy to just sit on the sidelines, right? As Apple's finances got worse and worse, he basically orchestrated a boardroom coup. By July of 1997, the CEO, Gil Amelio, was out, and the board named Steve Jobs the interim CEO. The king had returned. Jobs did not waste a single second. He immediately kicked off this ruthless, radical overhaul of the entire company, and he started with that bloated, confusing product line. The changes he made were honestly brutal, but they were absolutely necessary. He cut 70% of Apple's products, just gone. He laid off thousands of employees, and he killed the program that let other companies make Mac clones, which was eating into Apple's own sales. The goal was simple: stop the bleeding and get focused.
And then he did something nobody saw coming. In one of the most shocking moments in tech history, Jobs got on stage and announced a partnership with Microsoft. Yeah, their arch rival. Microsoft invested $150 million into Apple. Now, that move guaranteed Microsoft Office would keep coming out for the Mac, but more importantly, it sent a signal to the entire world that Apple was not going to die. So, that whole chaotic mess of a strategy, it got boiled down to something brilliantly simple. Jobs drew a 2x2 grid on a whiteboard. He said Apple would now make just 4 products: a desktop and a laptop for regular consumers, and a desktop and a laptop for professionals. That was it. From dozens of models down to 4. This laser focus changed literally everything. All right, so the company was stable again. Now it was time to actually innovate. And the very first product of this new era of Apple would become the symbol of its incredible comeback. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac, and it looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It was this all-in-one computer that came in this crazy, see-through, bondy blue plastic shell, and people went wild for it. It was a massive hit. Apple sold 800,000 of them in just the first 5 months, and just like that, the company was profitable again for the first time in years. But the iMac wasn't just pretty, it was so forward-thinking. It famously got rid of the floppy disk drive, which was a huge controversy at the time, but totally visionary. It was also one of the very first computers to make USB the standard. And that I in iMac,
It stood for Internet, which told you this was a machine built for the future. The iMac proved that Apple could survive. But the next big thing they released, it proved that Apple could once again change the world. And it wasn't a computer at all. It was a little device that would completely turn the music industry on its head. The speed of the iPod's success is just staggering when you look at it. It came out in 2001, but the real magic kicked in 2003 with the launch of the iTunes Store. Suddenly, you could easily and legally buy songs online. Just 5 years later, Apple had sold over 100 million iPods, and the iTunes Store was the #1 music retailer in the entire world. The comeback was complete. Apple wasn't just back, it was on top. Which brings us all the way back to our big question. Looking at Apple's story, it's pretty clear it wasn't just about one product or one person. It was about a ruthless focus, a courage to throw out the old way of doing things, and a massive bet on a future that really only they could see. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other great ideas are just one visionary leader away from changing everything?